The neon lights outside the Oak Ridge Tavern buzzed faintly, casting streaks of red and blue onto the rain-slicked sidewalk. Inside, the air was warmer, filled with chatter, laughter, and the faint clinking of glasses. Friday nights were always busy here, but for Haley Grant, they felt longer than most. At 23, Haley had already learned more about responsibility than many her age. She worked behind the bar with quick hands and a steady smile, auburn hair pulled back tightly to keep it out of her face. Every movement was practiced, pouring drinks, wiping down counters, answering questions, all while keeping an eye on the door. She wasn't just working to pass time. Haley carried the weight of bills stacked in a drawer at home, the shadow of college tuition she couldn't finish paying, and the gnawing pressure of rent due at the end of the month. She dreamed of a different life, maybe running her own little cafe one day, a space filled with warmth, light, and peace. But dreams, she knew, cost money. And money meant double shifts, long nights, and pretending exhaustion didn't exist. Just after 10 o'clock, the door creaked open. A man stepped inside who seemed out of place in the noisy bar. He was older, mid-70s, perhaps, his tall frame slightly bent with age. His suit was neat but rumpled, like it had been worn too long. His thinning silver hair caught the glow of the overhead lights, and in his hand, he clutched a worn brown wallet as though it anchored him. Haley's instinct stirred. She had worked long enough to recognize when someone was uneasy. His eyes moved slowly across the room, uncertain, searching. She waved him toward a stool at the far end of the bar, away from the rowdy crowd. "Evening," she said warmly as he Saturday, "what can I get you?" "Just water," the man replied, his voice gravelly, quiet. Haley poured the glass, set it down gently, and leaned an elbow on the counter. "Here you go." "Long night?" The man offered the faintest of smiles. "You could say that." Before Haley could reply, she noticed movement from the corner. Two young men in flashy jackets leaned toward each other, then toward the older man. She recognized them instantly. They were regulars, smooth talkers who thrived on exploiting anyone they thought looked weak or lonely. One of them called out with an easy grin. "Hey, sir, you ever think about making your money work for you? We've got a little investment thing going, exclusive, high return, no risk." The second chimed in quickly. "Yeah, you put in a little, you'll see it double in weeks. Not many people get this chance." The older man, still clutching his wallet, looked uncertain. He tilted his head, listening, his brow furrowed. Haley's stomach tightened. She'd seen this game before. They targeted anyone who seemed unsure, anyone who looked like they might be desperate for kindness or hope. And the man sitting at her bar looked exactly like the kind of target they wanted. She straightened, walked closer, and spoke calmly. "Sir, can I borrow you for a quick check by the bar register? Won't take a minute." The two men shot daggers at her with their eyes, irritation playing, but Haley didn't waver. The older man blinked, surprised, but rose slowly and followed her. When they were out of earshot, Haley lowered her voice. "I don't mean to overstep, but those guys. They're scammers. They'll promise you a deal, take your cash, and vanish. I've seen them before." The man's lips parted slightly. His voice trembled. "Are you sure?" Haley nodded firmly. "Positive. Please don't give them anything. Let me handle it if they bother you again." Relief washed over his face, his shoulders sagging slightly. "Thank you. I wouldn't have known." When they returned, the two men were already slipping out the door, muttering curses under their breath. Haley let out a breath of her own and turned back to the older man with a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about them," she said. "You're safe here." He settled back onto the stool, lifting his glass of water. After a moment, he spoke again. "I should thank you. You didn't have to step in." "It's part of the job," Haley replied, though she knew it was more than that. Something in his expression had reminded her of her grandfather, long gone now. She couldn't stand the thought of someone like him being tricked. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Martin," he said after a pause. "Martin Hale." "Well, Martin, it's good to have you here." For the next hour, Martin stayed, sipping slowly at his water while the noise of the bar buzzed around him. At first, his words were few, but as time passed, they grew. He told her about his late wife, gone nearly 10 years. About the silence in his house, the kind that pressed heavy on the chest. About his children, busy with families of their own, scattered in faraway cities. Haley listened carefully, nodding, offering small smiles when his voice broke or softened. She wasn't just humoring him, she knew how it felt to carry burdens quietly. Sometimes, being heard was the only relief. She noticed how his posture changed as the minutes stretched. His shoulders lowered, his voice steadied, his eyes grew less clouded. It was as though, for the first time in a long while, someone reminded him that he wasn't invisible. When midnight neared, Martin stood to leave. He reached into his wallet, pulling out a bill, but Haley shook her head. "It's just water," she said kindly. "On the house." He hesitated, then slipped a small cream-colored card from his pocket. He placed it gently on the counter. His name, Martin Hale, was printed neatly across it. "Thank you, Haley," he said softly. "You may not realize it, but you gave me more than water tonight. You gave me back a little faith." She smiled faintly, tucking the card into her apron. She thought it was just another night, another customer she'd helped. She had no way of knowing who he truly was. Because Martin Hale wasn't just a lonely old man with a wrinkled blazer. He was a man with the means to alter lives, a man who carried resources and influence hidden behind his quiet demeanor. And soon, he would come back. Not as a stranger in need, but as someone determined to change Haley's life forever. The following week passed like most others for Haley, long nights behind the bar, short mornings spent trying to catch up on sleep, and afternoons filled with the hum of laundry machines or the quiet weight of overdue bills. She thought often about the older man who had wandered in, grateful for her intervention. She remembered the way his voice had carried a kind of loneliness that was too familiar. Still, she assumed she would never see him again. Customers came and went. Stories brushed past her life like wind, here for a moment, gone the next. But one Thursday evening, as Haley tied her apron behind the bar, the door opened, and her breath caught. Martin Hale stepped inside, looking less uncertain this time. His blazer was pressed, his shoes polished, and though his steps were still slow, there was intention in the way he carried himself. "Back again," Haley said warmly, surprised at her own rush of relief. "Back again," Martin echoed, his smile faint but real. He took the same stool as before, and this time he didn't ask for water. "Coffee, if you've got it." Haley grinned. "Not our specialty, but I'll make it strong." As she poured, Martin glanced around the bar. "I wanted to thank you again, for the other night. You didn't have to do what you did. I couldn't just watch them take advantage of you," Haley said, sliding the cup across. "Besides, I've seen worse tricks. They always target people who look like they've still got something worth taking." Martin sipped his coffee and studied her. "And you? You look like someone who gives more than she has." The comment surprised her. She laughed lightly, though her eyes softened. "Maybe. But what else is there to do? People need someone to look out for them." That night, Martin stayed longer. Their conversation stretched beyond polite exchanges. He asked her about herself, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she answered honestly. She told him about her grandmother's house, about juggling bills, about the way college had slipped out of reach. She admitted, almost sheepishly, that she dreamed of opening her own cafe one day. Martin listened carefully, never interrupting, his hands folded around his coffee cup. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "You remind me of my wife," he said at last. "She believed in making something beautiful out of very little. The words lingered with Haley long after he left. Days turned into weeks, and Martin became a quiet fixture at the Oak Ridge Tavern. He came 2, sometimes 3 nights a week, always asking for coffee, always sitting in the same seat. He never overstepped, never pushed, just listened. And in return, Haley listened too. She learned he had once built a real estate company, that he had retired but still sat on boards. She learned he had more money than he let on, though he never flaunted it. He spoke more about his regrets than his successes, time lost with his children, years when he let work matter more than family. For Haley, those nights became the highlight of her week. He was the kind of presence that made her feel less invisible, less like a cog in a wheel that never stopped turning. Yet she never expected anything more. One quiet Tuesday, near closing, Martin lingered at the bar after the last customers had gone. He set his cup down gently and looked at her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "Haley," he said, "would you humor an old man and meet me for lunch tomorrow? Somewhere away from here." Haley hesitated. "Lunch?" "Just lunch," he assured her. "I promise it's not trouble." She studied him, then nodded slowly. "All right. Lunch." The next day, she found herself at a small restaurant downtown, dressed in her best blouse, still nervous as she spotted him waiting at a corner table. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with an old-fashioned courtesy that made her smile. "Thank you for coming," he said. As they ate, Martin spoke more openly than ever. He told her about the wealth he rarely mentioned, about the foundation he had created after his wife's passing, dedicated to supporting young people with dreams they couldn't afford. He admitted that night at the bar had stirred something in him, the way she had stepped in without hesitation, the way she listened, the way she carried herself despite her own hardships. "You saved me from more than a scam," Martin said quietly. "You reminded me that people can still act out of kindness. And I'd like to return that kindness, if you'll allow me." Haley frowned, unsure. "What do you mean?" "I want to help you," Martin said simply. "Finish your education. Start that cafe you dream of. You've got drive, you've got vision, you just need a chance." Her heart pounded. "Mr. Hale, I can't accept something like that. You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied, his gaze steady. "I know you're honest. I know you work harder than most. And I know opportunities don't come often for people like you. Let me do this, not as charity, but as an investment in someone who deserves it." Tears pricked at the corners of Haley's eyes, and she shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why me?" Martin's voice softened. "Because one night, you decided a stranger was worth protecting. Because you looked past what you saw and chose to care. And because I believe that people like you, people who give even when they don't have much, are the ones who should be given a chance." For a long moment, Haley sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing against the doubts that screamed in her head. Then, slowly, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "I'll accept." From that day forward, everything began to shift. Martin kept his promise. He arranged for her to finish her classes, covering tuition she could never have managed alone. He introduced her to contacts who could advise her on starting a business, people who believed in her because he did. Haley worked harder than ever, balancing classes, shifts, and meetings, but now every hour had purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building. And Martin, true to his word, never treated her as a project. He became a mentor, a confidant, and eventually, something like family. Months later, when the cafe finally opened its doors on a sunny street corner, Haley stood behind the counter, her name painted proudly above the door. She brewed the first pot of coffee with trembling hands, looking out at the small crowd that had gathered. Among them, Martin sat quietly at a table, his eyes shining with pride. As customers filed in, laughter spilling into the air, Haley felt something she hadn't in years, peace. She had stepped in one night to save a man from a scam, thinking it was just another shift, another moment of doing the right thing. She never could have imagined it would lead here, to a life transformed. And in that moment, as she carried the first steaming cup to Martin's table, she realized the truth. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can open the door to the greatest changes.